hope everybody brought your popcorn. You're going to need it. I hope you didn't pop it. You need the seeds. What we're going to do is my little baby rattle project. It's not very difficult. It's a fun little project. So usually start with a 2x2 or 3x3 by 6-ish piece of wood. And remember, this is for a baby. So that's about the width of a baby's hand, not this big club. So remember that you really only need about 2 inches of actual rattle body and 2 or 3 inches of handle. So you have plenty of room to play with. I have no idea what this piece of wood is. It came to me in a box with a lot of other wood from a certain character we all know named Mark Soleil. So no clue what that is, but we're just going to find a rough center. You can eyeball that. It's up to you how you deal with the center. I love this little center finder. I think it cost me $3.25 at Klingspor, and this probably the best thing you can buy for your shop under $4 is this little center finder. Especially from a piece like this that is not square, obviously go from all 4 corners, and that gives you an average of what your center is. Works on a round piece or a almost square piece. And then just use some kind of a center punch. I made this little awl by driving a 16 penny nail into a piece of camphor burl from a project, and then I just sharpened the head off of the nail and made myself a little punch. And I'm going to put my tenon on this side. I may not necessarily put a tenon on it. I may leave it sort of square and just grab it with the jaws of my chuck. We'll see. But this is going to end up in a chuck. We'll start between centers. This is all spindle orientation, so we will use spindle tools, except Mr. Soleil will tell you, as will Richard Raffin, rough with your bowl gouge. Why? Because if you use your bowl gouge, you can send the shavings that away while you're roughing, rather than shooting them straight in your own face. That's a step center, so if I push a little hard, it'll spin. One thing I like about using a step center is it forces me to pay attention to how much force I'm using and use less and let the tool do the job. I'm going to be upset with myself, I think. I think this is a piece of hawthorn. But you know what? It'll make a beautiful baby rattle, so I guess it'll be okay. I usually like to use hawthorn for things like candlesticks or finials because it's so white, very bright. All right, we're just about round on most of it. Feels good. Yeah, I think that's hawthorn. It's pretty. And we may not need to do much in the way of a tenon. I think we can just grab it. So really what we're going to do here is make a sphere and a little spindle, just a little spindle. Let me flatten off this edge so that we have a nice square seat to get into the chuck. It's about exactly the size of the chuck jaw, so I don't think I can put a dovetail on it, but we'll be all right. You definitely want to have nice, square, flat bottom. Sorry, I forgot to turn my phone on silent. How rude of me.
No, we didn't hear it.
Oh, well, good. Nothing to see here. Nothing happened, folks. Okay, so we're going to get this into a chuck. And first, we're going to throw it on the floor, which happens in my shop at least 3 times per project. And then we'll get it in the chuck. So if you're unfamiliar with the Steb Center, I really like the design because if you push too hard, it's meant to slip in the wood, and that helps prevent catches because you don't have these big chunky wedges that want to force the wood to keep turning. This will just slip. So it really does guide your guide the cuts, how much you're pushing on your tool, because you shouldn't be pushing on the tool. You should let the wood come to the tool and let the tool do the work, and that really makes it so you have to. It kind of forces you to do that. If you have a chuck, or if you have a spindle that has a flattened section at the bottom of the threads so that you can set a grub screw, do it. Use that grub screw. That is a safety feature, and that helps, especially if you're turning something heavy, so that that doesn't screw back on you when you stop the lathe. If you have a lot of inertia, that lathe can actually screw back on you. Okay, we have a tight fit, so we're going to get our. You're not supposed to bottom your piece out in the chuck, however, because that's just about exactly the width of the chuck. In order to make sure that I do have a good square fit, I have to. So this is poor practice, but this piece of wood was just barely big enough, and that is an exact fit in my chuck. Back that off and make sure, yeah, that's not going to go anywhere. So pushing the limit there, but that's okay. It's going to work just fine. And there are so many ways to do this. It's not even funny. I'm going to use the skew because I seem to be having a good skew evening. But first I'm going to touch up my skew. So I use diamond card. This is 400 grit. And I'll just follow it, that curve, very lightly. And I don't really get terribly involved with that because I like to use a leather strop. So this is a strop block. It's just a piece of wood with the suede side of the leather up, glued on it. And this is just stropping compound. These are inexpensive. You can get them a lot of places. So I go about 20 times on each side. And you'll notice because I have that curved grind, similar to Allen Lacers, I'm rocking back and forth so that I get the entire surface of the curve as I draw that strop. And that's going to give me an absolutely, literally razor sharp blade. This little scar right there, I was grabbing a tool rest from the lower level of my little tool shelf, and I just bumped my skew, sliced me wide open. It's sharp. So we're going to start out with some peeling cuts. Let's take down some diameter so that we can start working out some shape. And again, this is a baby rattle, and I like to sell these as heirlooms. However, they're playable, they're usable. So we want to make sure that we make something that's both beautiful and durable. I prefer to use hardwoods The most recent one, the one that I showed y'all, and Dane said we need a demo, was elm, spalted elm, and that one is a stunning piece. And the grandfather who purchased it was very, very pleased with it. So we're going to start work out some dimensions here, and we'll be slightly scientific. We're going to round that just a tiny bit more, but we will be slightly scientific with our layout of the ball, and we are going to leave our handle intentionally long. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this down. To about half an inch, maybe a little bit more than half an inch, maybe 5/8. I'm going to leave a nice square shoulder so that this will mount in the pin jaws on the chuck. And now, like I said, we're going to be a little bit scientific about how we do this, keeping in mind that we are going to have to join the handle with the ball. So we're going to measure our diameter. That'll be the outside diameter of our little rattle, but it will also give us our height. And we are about 1/2. Okay. It's not bad. That's pretty good size. So we want to draw lines on either side of what's going to be the ball or the sphere of the rattle. We want to leave ourselves room for a way for the handle to attach to the rattle. Then we're going to divide that roughly in half. You can eyeball it, you can measure it. I have a tendency to eyeball it. That's just what I do. But if you want to be exact, you most certainly can do the math. Math hurts my brain, so I eyeball it. And typical sphere formation, except we are going to hollow this, so we don't want to get too far in our backside. We can go about to half of the width of what the top of the sphere will be, but we don't want to go much past that because hollowing is going to create some torque, and we certainly don't want to break that sphere off while we're hollowing it. So don't get too excited about the left side. Give it a basic shape, but you definitely can come around and get your right side, your tailstock side, turned down to a sphere for the most part. V-cut first. And again, we need to leave this tenon and this shoulder here, but we can work on bringing our handle down a little bit more. And we want to leave a bit of a shoulder. So we're just very roughly cutting this. We'll start working on the shape of our sphere a little bit. Just so that we can start to get a bit of a view of the shape. And then we're going to come in with a fairly narrow parting tool. off of the end of the ball of the sphere. Ooh. This is a little shop-made parting tool, and it has no burr. We'll just real quickly with our little diamond card, touch that up. We will real quickly with the sharpener, touch that up. I was using this on the resin project that I've got going, and that resin is very, very hard, and that ate that whole cutting edge of that pretty badly. If you play with resin, you know certain resins can really be rough on tools. Now, when you're parting, you want to go wider than your tool by a bit so that your tool doesn't bind up. But what I'm also going to do is be a little bit scientific again. I'm going to set my caliper for 3/4 of an inch because I want to leave a 3/4 inch tenon on my handle. So I want to get this down to 3/4 of an inch, and then we're going to use a thinner parting tool to part it the rest of the way. Right about there. And the reason I want 3/4 of an inch is because I need to be able to get my 1/2 inch scraper into the bottom of the bowl. So I need at least 1/8 of an inch left over on either side. So this is my little shop made narrow curve or thin curve parting tool. It is a Sawzall blade that I just took to the sharpening system and shaped. Rock it back and forth so that you get that cut wider. Get down close. Be very careful if you do that with the Sawzall blade. Those are flexible and they will bind. So you really have to pay attention when you're using that tool. Do not push it too hard. It will bite you. And I usually like to finish with my little Japanese pull saw so things don't go flying. Set that aside, double check, make sure you've got your 3/4 inch tenon, which we do, just absolutely perfect, which is what we want. Set that aside and we can work on our little sphere a little bit more. So I was using the skew, but you can also use your 3/8 inch spindle gouge with the signature Marc Soleil swept back grind. Now, remembering this is going to be a baby rattle and that I am going to hollow it, I want to break the sphere and give myself some kind of a foot or a joint where the handle can come in. So I'm going to stop before I really make this spherical. I'm going to make myself a bead. And this is going to do two things. First of all, it's going to give me a place to make the hole to hollow, but it's also going to help disguise the joint so that we can, using that ball-to-ball construction that Mark teaches, we can make it so that you can't quite tell exactly where the seam is. That also helps prevent little fingers from digging at and prying into and managing to find a way to separate the handle from the body of the rattle. If you make lidded boxes, This is, in essence, a very, very small box. Just come back, and again, we only want to go about halfway the shape of our sphere. And it doesn't have to be spherical. It needs to be round. This little point here, that will get softened. It doesn't have to be a perfect sphere. You can, in fact, this cracked, or this would be a rattle, and that's more of an oblong shape. But I rough turned that and put it in silica to try to dry, and it decided to crack in spite of all I did to try to dry it. So, rough, again, rough right now. We just want to get it to a point where we can hollow it. And we don't want to come all the way around here because we're going to use a lot of torque. We're going to create a lot of torque as we hollow, and we definitely don't want to break this off of there. Just work on our little lip there. Tiny bit of refinement on this shape. And we're going to start to think about hollowing. If, depending on your lathe, if you can, take your tailstock off so that you don't put your elbow into your 60-degree live center. That doesn't feel good. And if you have a newer 60-degree live center, it leaves scars. And we're going to hollow. Now, again, remember, we've got 3/4 inch. So we'll slow the lathe down and touching only the point that is closest to you.
Any chance you can zoom in, JJ?
Hang on a second. My compressor is charging. What was that?
Any chance you can zoom in?
That's his, yeah, give me a second. I have it set back for a larger piece. I don't think we're going to, there we go. All right, focus you. I'm working on getting better cameras, guys. These cameras are terrible, but they were cheap. Okay, so we're just going to touch this side. If you touch that side, it flips the tool up, and that's sharp, and it'll hurt you. Just touch that side. Slow your lathe way down. We're just going to touch that side. We're going to mark our 3/4 of an inch, and we may stay a little bit shy of it so we can sneak up on it, because we do want a friction fit. We want our handle to pop in and pop out. Ultimately, that's going to be glued, but while we're making it, it's not going to be glued. Okay, where did I, over here, set my gouge down. There's arguments either way. I could get I could get my tailstock up here, get the Jacobs chuck, put in the 3/4 inch Forstner bit and drill this, or I can do the same thing.
Or you can turn it and be done with it.
Yeah, I can just turn it and be done. This is the drill and pull method. I like to call it the drill and push method. Take your gouge about 45 degrees angle, push it straight in, and then what I do, my left hand is a fulcrum. I push the handle of the tool away, which swings the tip outward. And voila. So I'm not going quite to my line, right? Because I need to have straight sides. So that my little tenon on my handle fits. So I'm not going to come all the way out, but I am removing a large amount of bulk on the inside of that. We'll stop, push the tip of the tool down, kind of get a little read on depth, and I can go about a 1/2 inch more, maybe 3/8 instead of a 1/2, which is about 3 more passes. It'll find the center on its own automatically. It'll just do it. Okay, we'll worry about the rest of that depth in a minute. So I still have my little 3/4 inch mark here. I can square that up multiple ways. Probably the easiest and safest way is just to come back with a 1/2 inch skew or a Steve Twiddell signature miniature skew, and just come in straight in, a nice slight cut. What you're doing is lining this surface of the blade. Let me see, you might see this better overhead. What you're doing is lining this angle, that edge, with the bedway of your lathe and pushing straight in, and that should give you a perfectly square shoulder for that recess. We'll come back with our vernier caliper here, and we are just outside of our 3/4 of an inch, which is perfect, or just inside of it, which is perfect. Again, we want this to be a good tight fit. So we will wait until we start fitting the lid, till we're ready to fit the lid. And it should be too big right now. I want to leave it too big while I'm doing all this stuff and all this work in here. I want to leave it too big, or too small, I should say, so that I can bring it out to make this friction fit. This won't get touched again. Once I clean this end off, I will never touch this part of the tenon. Once I have that friction fit, that's done. It's not going to be touched again. So I want to wait and do that kind of last, get this to fit this last. Now here I ran into a problem when I decided I was going to do small hollow forms. That problem being that the only tool I had to do hollowing was this big swan neck tool. And it's too big for something this small. So I got on the Zon and found the high-speed steel blanks, and I got this nice 2-inch wide, or 40 millimeter by 200 millimeter by 8 piece, and I carved myself a miniature swan neck tool. It's not perfect by any means, but it absolutely is functional. I've got a nice wide base. One of the things that I will do different the next time I make it is this cutting edge should be in line, either dead center with your tool or with the front edge of your tool. That helps to counter the torque. This is kind of half that splits the distance a little. I again had never done this before. I got up the grinding wheel and went to town, and this is what I came up with. So I would recommend, if you're going to make your own swan neck tool, change and make sure that your swan neck actually comes out as close to the outer edge, the inside or left edge, I guess you would say, of the tool as possible. And again, what that does is counter the torque of the spinning, or line it up dead center. The way this style swan neck works, where'd I put it? The way this style swan neck works is the cutting edge is aligned with the just to the left of center of the actual shaft of the tool, which again counters that torque. So this works, it counters the torque, but think about that if you make your own. I will be doing another one redesigning it, but it has this wonderful Wenge handle and it works. So, and I'm just going to start just inside and switch back just inside, and we're just going to work the upper quadrant here. And here you definitely need to stop frequently and check. And since my big meaty fingers are so big, that means I can just stick my pinky finger in there. And I've got down to roughly right here. And I can actually start working out more now because I have a good, at least a 1/8 of an inch, probably closer to 3/16 of an inch thickness, which is about the wall thickness I want, is about 3/16 of an inch. This needs to be able to take a good whack. It's for a baby. Babies bang things. So it needs to be able to take a good whack, but it also needs to stay light. So when they bang their sibling with it, they don't harm their sibling. I'm using Trent Bosch's hollowing method. You do the top section first, then you kind of split the difference with the middle. You work that section. You can feel the inside of the curve with the tip of your tool. And this little tool runs out of usefulness by about the middle, but it gets that inside edge. So come back, get our natural depth gauge in there. Ooh, wonderful. I've got good, I'm right inside the curve here. There's no way to show you on camera, but I've got my curve and it's traveling well. My depth, I'm at about half of the depth. So remember I told you I needed this 3/4 of an inch wide so that I could get my 1/2 inch scraper in there. This is a wonderful crown scraper, 1/2 inch scraper that Steve Twidell sent me. And it's a great, if you don't have a 1/2 inch wide scraper, you owe it to yourself to get a 1/2 inch wide scraper. It's really useful. So I just want to come in and work. I'm going to make a drawing for you. Hang on just a second. Where are they? So that you can see what the inside of that feels like. Go back to overhead. Here we have our little ball, as it were. Now I've talked again. I drilled down the center with the tool. Then I cleared this section. Then I worked this section, and I've got it to right about here, so it's hollow. So I've got this sharp ridge here. Now I use that swan neck that came around. At this point, the swan neck can't get much deeper. However, I can come in at a very slight angle with that 1/2 inch scraper and work this edge away and work it back and work it back. And with about 4 or 5 cuts, maybe a little bit more, I can just slowly work this all down until I can push that scraper straight in and swing it and get a nice smooth surface on the bottom of this very small hollow form. If you think about this like a tiny vase or a tiny hollow form, that's exactly what you're doing. It's the exact same process, exact same steps, it's just smaller. So we're going to come in, we're going to aim for that corner. We're just going to start working it away. I tip that scraper up a little bit to get more of a shear action. And that's it. I felt the bottom. I can clear out a tiny bit more in this quadrant. Not much. That should do her. Beautiful. I have a nice, smooth, round surface in there, roughly 3/16 of an inch thick, consistent. That's all we need. It just needs to be hollow and it needs to be able to ring. So now we can work on fitting our little tenon so that we have a nice friction fit. So we'll bring our handle back. And I noticed something on this tenon. When I parted it, my parting tool lifted a little bit of edge here. So we can just come in very, very lightly with a skew, use it like a carving knife and just clean that edge off. just a little bit. That's just got that little ridge off of there. So still too small, which is perfect. That's what we want. We're going to go ahead and come in with our Steve Twidell miniature skew chisel. And very lightly widen that. There we go. We have a friction not finish. We have a friction fit. Now we can concern ourselves with the handle. While I put the pin jaws on, sorry, I would have my second chuck set up with pin jaws so that I don't have to change jaws. But it's holding a project, and you know, when you take a project out of the chuck, it never goes back in the same. So you got to sit through a jaw change. Sorry. But while I'm doing this, if anybody has any questions, I can take them at this time.
Is now when you put the popcorn in?
No, not quite yet. We're going to put the popcorn in to test it, and then we're going to put the popcorn in when we glue it. And I
Gotcha.
thought very hard about using CA just for the sake of it's a demo, but this is going to be a pretty little rattle. So I'm going to do it right, and I'm going to use Type Bond 3. So we'll test it without glue, and then we will glue it. But with the understanding, you have to wait until tomorrow for the glue to set. So once we put glue on it, no more testing it. But popcorn seeds. So the first one of these I made, which I gave to my friend Mick. He and his wife had a baby girl, and I didn't know what to use for the rattle. And I think it was you, Matt, who said popcorn seeds. When I showed you,
I tried a bunch of different things, and popcorn actually works the best.
Well, I turned beads. I turned 5 or 6 little beads out of some, just a little chunk of maple, and I figured out that 3 sounded best inside my little rattle. And you said, well, just put popcorn seeds in there, and I went, well, holy cow! I could have done that all along, and it saved me a lot of time. So
yeah, and dried corn works pretty good too. If you've got dried corn, that works really good too. So it's nearly the same thing, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, basically the same. It's just a different strain. Yeah. So I think I learned this in this group too. Put your jaws on, keep your screws loose, and then close your chuck before tightening the screws, and you will get a perfect fit. So this is the old style Nova G3 anniversary edition. My other one, the one that's holding the project, is a new style. If you have the choice of purchasing the new style over the old style, it has a couple of upgrades. One being that it is true lefty loosey, righty tighty, which this one is not. This one is righty loosey, lefty tighty, because it was sold as an expanding jaw. So to tighten it, you want the jaws to open if you're selling an expanding jaw chuck. I was watching a Jimmy Clues demo on YouTube, and he explained that he was visiting a club doing a bowl turning demonstration, and they all had Nova G3s, and he didn't realize it. And he went through and loosened everybody's chuck because he was tightening making sure they were tight. And he turned them right to tighten them, or left to tighten them down on tenons, and he inadvertently opened them. So jaws loose. So as you can see, I'm turning it counterclockwise to tighten the jaws, which is counterintuitive for most turners in this day and age. Tighten these
Yeah, mine are
down.
old school. They're like at second nature.
Lefty loosey, righty tighty.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I have
Well, I
no
mean, we
problems
grew up.
going between it or my Vicmar, which is, the standard direction. I don't miss a beat. I just know automatically, Nova.
Yeah, I know
Left,
by
tighten.
the patina on the jaws which one I have and which way I have to turn it.
Yeah.
But if they were both shiny, I would mess it up all the time. So just something.
Acetone would clean that right up.
Yeah, no
Right?
thanks. I leave it that way on purpose. I can tell which one it is. All right, so we've got our pin jaws. Here's our handle with our little tenon on it. I probably could have taken that down a little bit more, but it's fine. What's important is this piece, this shoulder here is square and these are square. So as long as you can set that on that shoulder, it really, the rest is gravy. It doesn't matter. As long as that's square on that shoulder, that's going to be dead straight. So remember, I gave a little bit of a ball shape here, and that's going to be so that we can kind of disguise our joint. You're not going to be able to really tell where the two meet. So we want to round this shoulder as well to give us that ball to ball construction and prevent a place where little fingers can get in and pry. If it's smooth and round, it makes it harder for those mischievous little fingers to take it apart. So we'll come back with the spindle gouge. 3/8" spindle gouge. Whoop. I knocked it up. I knocked it askew a little bit. You can see where it's riding up. Check that. Make sure you get that in there dead on. Should be there. If it's a tiny bit off, as long as I don't touch this tenon, it doesn't matter. I just can't mess with this tenon or I'll lose my friction fit and I'll have to start all over again with the fit, which we can do. We might, we'll just not touch the tenon, but it'll be fine. So we're just going to round this, and it certainly can be a lot smaller. Let's see if I can bring you guys in. And I'm sorry, this camera doesn't like to focus. Again, I'm working on improving that. So we're just going to bring that around. And again, we need to remember we are aiming for little fingers, not big clubs. So we want to turn this down pretty thin. And then I usually like to put some kind of a swell or ball at the bottom end of the handle. Because again, this is a baby's hand, is a baby holding it, and they're swinging it around, they're bonking their brothers and sisters with it. But you want something to catch in the bottom of the hand so that it doesn't just swoop right out. So we'll form kind of a swell down here. something for the baby's hand to catch on so that it doesn't just go flinging. Make sure we got nice, smooth, not bad. That feels pretty good. We'll do a little bit of sanding. Now, again, I'm using Mr. Soleil's slicing technique, so I have a very nice, clean finish on here. So we can start sanding at 240 grit. It really won't take very long because we're not sanding a whole lot because this thing's tiny. So slow your lathe down. Again, I'm not worried about the fact that that's not perfectly aligned. It's nobody will ever see it. That ball-to-ball construction will hide that joint very well. If it does bother you, it's easy to return that down to your 3/4 of an inch. So this is spindle orientation. So come back and sand with the grain, and that'll help disguise any of your little circular sanding scrapes from the paper as it's turning around. That's, wow, that feels nice. It's a nice finish already. We haven't even gotten to the finishing part. 320. And yes, I'm disappointed in myself. This is Hawthorne. I wish I'd recognized that when it was raw and saved it, but that's okay. It's going to be pretty.
Even a demo piece should be a final project.
It's almost like porcelain. It's so bright white. It's just pretty and it's very smooth. This wood finish feels like plastic. It's so smooth. It's really nice wood. It's not something I get my hands on. In fact, the only 2 pieces of Hawthorne I've turned are from Mark Soleil. They were in a box that Mark gave me.
You find it's whiter than holly?
I think it's as white as holly. I think they're interchangeable to me, but I'm a colorblind Mexican, so do with that what you will. I like what I like is it's got a very nice closed grain, so it really shines well. If you want it glossy, you're going to get a lot of gloss out of this. So that's 400 grit. And another thing to remember is that little hands need some bit of something to catch on, to hang on to. And if you make this any smoother than it already is, which is probably too smooth, it's going to go flying a lot just because it's slick and they're not going to be able to keep their hands on it. So I'm not going to sand it anymore. That's a really, really nice finish. And again, we'll make sure we have our friction. I need to clean that. I need to take that down just a skosh. Check that and make sure that we're going to have our friction jam. So we're going to clean that up just a tiny bit. The very slightest of bits, we'll use our mini skew. And we're going to kind of give it a little bit of a chamfer, I think, just to try and make sure that we make sure that we have a jam. I don't think I need to take any more than, I don't think I want to take any more off of that. Oh, still have a tiny bit. That should do her. There we go. That's going to give us our friction fit. That's what we want. Go back to the 1/2 inch to part this. That mini skew is great for little tiny touch-ups, but I'm not adept enough with it to do something like finish a parting cut. So I choose not to. I choose safety. So close. There we go. And I learned this from a Cindy Drosta demonstration. A little knob right here on the end. You just sand across it. And that goes away almost immediately. So there is our little handle for our tiny rattle. All we have to do is finish the outside shape of this rattle and put the popcorn in it and see how it sounds. So again, apologies, but we're going to have to go through a jaw change. If I had if I'd used a 3x3 piece, I could have kept a tenon that fit the larger jaws on both ends. And we would have just swapped it out in the jaws. So that's another thing to think of if you don't want to do extra steps or you don't have a second chuck lying around that you can do the pin jaws on is put your tenon for your larger jaws. Those are 60 mil. Put your 60 mil tenon on both ends and you can just swap it around in the same chuck. Or you can jam it. There's so many different ways to hold this little piece. Sorry, I'm lining up the numbers. The one thing I like about also about the new version of the Nova G3 is it doesn't have numbers on the chuck itself, just the jaws. You align the jaws, and so you're not trying to make sure you have number one pointing in the right direction. You don't have to worry about it as long as you have the jaws in succession. So just something to think about if you're buying, like if somebody's selling all their old chucks and have a bunch of old G3s, think about that. It's not bad. It's just kind of a pain sometimes, especially if you're in a hurry, like you're doing a demonstration and you were a knucklehead and didn't have your other chuck free. So something to think about. Again, same thing. Do not tighten the screws down. Just get them in there and then tighten the jaws down and tighten the screws. And that makes a difference. I have discovered it makes a huge difference in instances where I was finding that I had just a little bit of discrepancy in alignment disappeared when I started making sure that I tightened my jaws down this way. I can't remember who taught us that, what demo it was, but that was a huge game-changing tip for me.
Yeah, tips and tricks. 6 months ago, touched on it.
Yeah, that was a game changer for me. It really does make a huge difference in alignment.
Yeah, it's imperative you do it like that.
And what's funny is I'm not one of those people who reads the entire manual. I don't. I'm terrible. I go to the manual when I can't. when I can't figure it out. The manual does describe it, especially the new one. The new one actually makes it really. I went and checked the new G3 manual, and I'm like, oh, there it is. It says right there. And it actually describes it a lot better than in the old one. It says it in the old one, but not the same way. And I was like, wow, gee, would have paid if I'd read that manual. I only check the manual if it's not working, because then I'm like, well, I did something wrong. I better check the manual. I'm awful.
Right. Well, they were going to use Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd to explain how to do it in the new manual, but they didn't have enough room for it. So yeah, they explain it better. You know.
They should have had Bozo the Clown explain it. So anyway, that guarantees you have perfect jaw alignment. So I think that's a very cool, very useful tip. And it actually gets us better chance to get that in there the same way it was. It's going to be close. It's never quite perfect when you take the piece out of the chuck and put it back in. It just isn't. That's just the way wood is. But this gets you a lot closer. So, and in this case, we bottomed it out, which you're not supposed to do, but that kind of gives us a little bit of an edge too. So let's see. Not bad. Definitely workable. So all we need to do is smooth this surface a little bit, just round this out a little. I'm going to show you a couple of different techniques. Actually, I'm going to show you a technique I stole from Steve Twaddell again. He's a good character. He knows some cool tricks. Took an old Savannah bowl scraper and lopped off the end and made a true square end scraper. And you can really get a nice smooth surface. Clean up any of those tool marks or a little bit of faceting. Very light. I like to kind of take it at a little bit of an angle downward, so you might raise your tool rest a little so that burr catches. The only thing I don't like is that this is a Savannah tool, which are very inexpensive because although it is high-speed steel, it's cheap high-speed steel. It's soft. But that's why I like making experimental tools with it, because it's cheap. So rather than ruin a $70 scraper, I ruined a $12 or $13 scraper. So let's just smooth that up a little bit. We'll come back with our spindle gouge and finish the bottom of our little sphere. Come back here. Cut away some so that our tool has a place to go. And just because we don't want to join the funnel club tonight, we're going to come in with an actual depth gauge and make sure that our eyeball yep, dead on. We're good to go. So I eyeballed that using my spindle gouge and my thumb, and I'm on, so I can finish out that shape. Before we get too excited and get too close, though, we need to sand the bulk of this. So we're going to take about 2 more passes, and then we're going to sand this up real quick. When you're coming around this curve, you've got to remember to swing your tool handle in order to keep that cutting edge in contact and keep cutting. You don't move the tool handle fast enough, you're going to actually lift up out of the cut like that. So you need to make sure you get that tool handle swinging fast enough to get you around that corner. We have a little bit of a weirdness here. You really have to make sure that you swing your body, shift your body weight so that you can swing that tool and get that to come up around that corner. There we go. That'll let us sand real quick. And we have a little discrepancy, but that'll sand right out. In fact, we'll start at 180 to get that little weirdness out. So a rule of thumb that I have developed for myself when sanding is if I think I can get away with it at 240 grit, I start at 180. That way, I catch all the little weirdness, little torn grains or little something. If I step one grit down from what I think I can get away with, I almost always find that I'll never have any odd stray marks. And again, since this is going to be in a baby's hands, get your fingers in there and make sure you feel and you don't find anything sharp. You don't want any sharp surfaces of any kind. That feels really good. We'll go ahead and go with the grain. I wish these cameras were good enough that you could see the grain pattern. It's just, this is a really pretty little piece of wood. We'll go with the grain. Get all those little circular scratches out. And as Mr. Burt says, spend your time at your lower grit. And you take a lot less time at your higher grits. Sage advice. Go. Okay. 240, 320, and 400. And those will go very quickly. Because at this point, we did any of the major work with 180 grit. So all we're doing at each successive grit is removing marks from the prior grit. Wow. I wish you guys could get the, I don't know if I can. There's no way for me to get this camera to you can see the rings. It's really pretty.
You should throw some dye on it.
Yeah. The only dye I have is black.
It'll bring out the rings, sand it back.
Yep. Yeah.
Sanding anyhow.
It might. Let's try it. Let's touch this with a little.
Yeah, let's do it.
I use vegetable based leather dye, which is safe. You could drink this stuff. I don't know why you would, but you could. It wouldn't hurt you. Now let's see if we can get some of these rings to come out so you guys can see it, because boy, is this a pretty piece of wood. I think it might make it too dark. Not on this camera. I'm so sorry. I'm going to get good pictures of this because, guys, this is some pretty wood. This is really, really beautiful. I'll have to get some good pictures of it. It's not going to bring it out at all. That's going to take the good camera on my phone, which is better than any other camera I own. Oh, we get that dye out of there. But this is actually a really, really very expressive piece of wood. There's some really cool grain pattern in here. Oh, maybe. Focus. Oh, it's not going to do it.
Trying to pop through.
Hmm?
Trying to pop through.
Yeah, it's focus more than anything. It's getting this camera to focus.
It is focused on the floor.
I can't see what I see. What I see on the screen, it's fuzzy as can be. All right, did we get it? Almost. You see that?
Now it looks like it's focusing on the shavings under your lathe. The stuff on
Yeah.
the floor is really focused, but the stuff on your piece on the lathe isn't really focusing.
Yeah, it's these cheapo cameras. Okay, so obviously we get to get the sanding done, but we're gonna step ahead here just for the time's sake. And we're gonna go ahead and part this off. We'll go back to the 1/2 inch skew chisel. We just hit the dew point. My face shield is fogging on me. There we go. So again, little cross screen here. And that cleans up very quickly. Won't really bore you with that because it's time to get out your popcorn.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Popcorn.
on the comments on the post today on the Facebook page, I told everybody to bring their popcorn. This is a very small rattle, probably 2 tablespoons. Yeah, maybe a tablespoon and a half volume in there. It's not very big. So we probably only want 8 or 10 kernels. A bigger ball, you put more in. That should probably give us enough. So that's the magic secret right there. Thanks to Mr. Harbor. And there you get your little baby rattle. Can you hear that?
Yep.
So from here, that's a good friction fit. I just take a pinky finger. Where is it? Where'd I put it? Ah, there it is.
It's right beside your ring finger.
No, I was looking for the Type Bond 3. I use Type Bond 3. It's the most water resistant. It dries the hardest. Type Bond 2 has a little bit of flexibility to it. I've never even tried Type Bond 1. Everybody that I've ever worked with has always gone straight to the Type Bond 3 and said, this is the stuff you need to use. So doesn't take a lot, but you want to make sure you get good thorough coverage. Put your little friction fit together. Find a place to stand it upright so it can dry and let it dry overnight. And you have, with the exception of finishing a little bit of work, you have a baby rattle. And it's that simple, and it's really not a very long project. It probably took me more time changing chuck jaws than actual turning. It's not, you can bang one of these out in about 35 minutes if you're just turning. They're pretty quick and easy, and they sound good. The bigger, now you can play with different woods and things. This is a very dense wood, so it's going to be very soft and quiet. Cherry is dense, but not as dense as this. It will have a more of a ring to it. Walnut makes a really good sounding rattle. The canary wood one I made sounded really good. What do they use in guitars? They use a lot of cedar for guitars because it rings. Cedar
Rosewood.
would be a good wood to use for this. Any of the musical woods. And somebody said, "Hey, make that about 3 times the size, and you've got maracas." And yeah, you do. So there's another use, but this is little tiny guy size, baby newborn size, and it's light enough. This weighs less than an ounce. That if it does get flung across the room at a sibling, it's not going to do any damage. Let's talk about finish real quick. One way you could go, and it's certainly valid, is to do a CA glue finish. And the reason you can do that, and I would consider that safe, is because cyanoacrylate is literally liquefied acrylic, and when it cures, it becomes completely neutral. It's
Inert.
it's inert. So it is considered food safe. CA finish is a pretty good finish. I prefer natural finishes. I use tongue honey from Brad's Workbench, and that is pure tongue oil, not polymerized tongue oil, beeswax, and carnauba wax, all of which are food safe. It takes about 3 weeks for pure tongue oil to cure. So you don't want to give this to a little guy until it's had about 3 or 4 weeks to just do its thing. But I'm currently using a coffee cup that I made out of cherry to drink water from at work, and it's water resistant. Good, clear, clean water. Doesn't taste funky or anything. And I use that Brad's Workbench on it, and it's working great. Any questions?
Does your
Well done,
cherry
Richard.
does your cherry drinking cup at work help sell other pieces?
Not yet, but I'm trying. What did you say, Mr. Soleil? I heard you.
I just said good demo.
Thank you, Mark.
The only thing that I would add, I kept my mouth shut at the time. The only thing, when I stick my hollowing tool in there, which is a modified little flat scraper, I have a little curved point or a little curved section like you modified your scraper, but I'm using a real thin little scraper.
Okay.
And I do have my point inside the left margin so that there's no torque. The only thing that I do is I lay, after I drill my hole, so that there's 1/8 of an inch left at the very bottom. That's going to be the thickness of my wall. I stick my little tool in there, and across the opening for the body, I draw a magic marker line. So that when I reach that line, I have 1/8 of an inch wall thickness at the bottom. Then
Gotcha.
I take and I lay the tool over the top of the ball, and at the widest point, I have the tool between the widest point at the tip, and the tool comes back over the top, and I center it over the hole. And I draw an angled line parallel to the where the tool comes over the center of the hole.
Mm-hmm.
That way I know that I'm 1/8 of an inch at the widest point, and I'm 1/8 of an inch from the end. And all I do is I just hollow it out until that line is parallel with the hole in the top, and the other line is parallel with the hole in the top that measures the bottom. So I don't have to constantly feel in. I just go back and forth, and as soon as it reaches the line, it's done.
There you go. There you go. And there's always there. I made this tool. I made this little hollowing tool. Oh, I probably made this 6 months before I met you, Mark. And I was trying to solve the problem of getting into small. I was making some, I wouldn't say miniature vases or hollow forms, but small hollow forms. And I was just trying to get around the problem of getting inside around that edge, around that top edge where this monster, that's a 10 mil
Yeah,
cutter.
big.
So it's already
Way too
huge.
big.
Yeah, it's too big. So well, what can I do? And I got on the Zon and found these big pieces of high speed steel, and they're not expensive. But what I had not learned at that point in time when I made this was that I really needed to try and keep this cutting surface as close to the center of the tool as possible. So I will do when I make a new one of these, I'm going to do it different. And what I may do is reshape this considerably and turn it into something else and make an entirely different tool. This is just what I made. This is probably the third tool I made for myself. It works. So I haven't.
You got plenty of room. Knock it off and
I'd probably just lop it off and just make another version of it. You're absolutely correct. So I just need to get around to it. I've been turning other things, so I haven't been doing little tiny projects like this until the adopted grandbaby came a few months ago, and I was like, oh, I need to make a top. And then somebody saw that top and wanted another top. You guys saw the second top, and here we are. So I'll probably reform it now.
Yeah. And again, the other thing that you can use, right, if you're using two different types of wood, right, in the rattles, you can always use the flexible CA glue, right, that never does crystallize. That way, if the two different woods expand or contract at a different rate, the super glue will never crystallize. It'll always remain flexible.
Now, one thing that I have not done is use two different glues for this. I've always used a single glue or single wood, two different glues, two different woods. I've always used a single wood and from a single piece because of expansion and contraction in order that if it's going to do it, it's going to do it at the same time because it's from the same chunk of wood was my reasoning.
And all like when I do hollow forms and everything, where I'm putting an insert collar on there and threading it, well, then I'll use the flexible super glue because it's going to be maple or something. But that way I never have to worry about, anything cracking or breaking down from the two different woods, different coefficients of expansion.
Yeah. Now, Dane's mentioning using an Allen wrench made before 2000 because they were made of hardened steel to make a miniature hollowing tool. Thank you, Martin.
Night, Martin.
Sam Angelo has a series of little
he does
little Allen wrench hollowing tools that he made from old Allen wrenches, and they're brilliant little tools.
Patterned off of the lathe straddler.
Yeah,
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, those work just fine, except you have to deal with the torque factor.
Absolutely,
as long as you have the little curve and the point, right?
Well, no, I mean by bending and modifying them. That way the cutting point's still on center, even with the Allen keys. But yes.
But you still
Yeah, one of the games you can play with those old Allen wrenches is to cut off the bend, make it smaller, and that way you can you get the cutting edge closer to the center of the shaft of the tool.
Nice. Nice.
So you just
All right.
I mean,
But
it sticks
anyway,
out.
very, very good demo, JJ.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. If anybody, nobody else has any questions, I got to get up at 4:30 in the morning to go to work. So,
Right on, JJ. Thank you.
all right. Thanks, Phil.
Great demo, Joaquin.
Thank
That
you.
was a great demo. Very, very, very good. Very
Demo.
enjoyable.